Today. I really came just to give you a tip. Geraldine is having a press conference at 1:30, so any of you interested in political notes had better get ready. Oh, I can't tell you that. I can't. I have spoken to him. Oh, I can't tell you that. What an anticlimax corporate takeover is going to be, right? I'm not giving you any comment. Just eat your heart out. I can't tell you that. No, really. I mean, she called him, and she obviously I can't tell you what her decision is. That's what she's going to do at 1:30, and I can't take that away from her. But she was very, very nice to call me. She's got a short list of people to talk to. It's always been clear that I would support her if she runs. Yeah. Okay, we waiting for somebody? All set? Yeah, does everybody have a copy of the statement? The statement, I hope, speaks for itself. What it was intended to say, just to summarize it, is that I call the legislature back to Albany because we were instructed by our superintendent of insurance that unless the legislature produced a bill that became a law, rates could go up dramatically, and that could present us with a serious problem. We had a proposal that was the result of many weeks of discussion and negotiation, including negotiation with the Republicans, that everyone agrees on both the Democratic and the Republican side would at least stabilize the rates until January 1 of 1987. I think that's an important point to underscore. Nobody on the Republican side is saying that our bill, my proposal, won't stabilize the rates. What they are saying is that, well, maybe we should go further than that. The Democrats are having difficulty with the Republican attempt to go further because if you analyze the principal pieces they're relying on, like the cap, every one of the principal pieces appears to take some justice away from victims. The cap, for example, says in effect that even if a jury properly said you're entitled to $1 million or 5 or 10, you'd only get $250,000. And the Democrats are saying we are not prepared to make that kind of concession, that our criminal justice system ought not, our civil justice system ought not to be allowed to say what's just, that we'll put a limit, an artificial, and the Democrats think unfair limit on justice. And so they say we're not prepared to do that, especially since we have already, Stanley Fink believes, and he may be right, led the United States in making alterations in our civil justice system, all of them dramatic, all of them very significant, and we can't tell yet what the impact is. And so to rush now to further sacrifices on the victims, and remember, we're dealing with victims. You know, the doctors, some of them, like to see this as a struggle between the doctors and the lawyers. I don't care about the lawyers, and I'm a lawyer. I care about the victims, the people who were found to have been mutilated or damaged because some hospital or some doctor did a wrong thing. And you mustn't take your eye off the ball. Anyway, the Democrats are saying, let's go with the July bill, which is already quite substantial in terms of changes, with this proposal, and then let's see what occurs. Who gets damaged? The Republicans are suggesting that unless we do everything they want, they will walk away from the situation and let the rates go up. I think that would be an awful mistake. I say in the statement that it is possible, or strike that. I think what I say is ideally, we can find procedural changes, insurance changes, that would make an appreciable difference in the rates beyond what I've been able to achieve up to this point. No point in playing percentage games. Let's just call it appreciable. And these procedural changes and insurance changes would not require taking more justice away from the victims. That's conceivable. We're working on it. We've been working on it for a long time. had discussions with Jerry Crotty as recently as 20 minutes ago, and Evan Davis has been working on it for weeks and weeks. There's still an area to be explored there, and the more you study, the more possibilities arise. I think the staff should continue to discuss those possibilities. But if they can't come up with something that goes beyond my proposal, and I hope they do, if all we're left with is the proposal that the Assembly has adopted, if all we're left with is the sureness of stabilized rates, then I say it would be a tragic mistake for the Senate to walk away, to adjourn, and say, because we couldn't get everything we wanted, we're going to suffer an increase in rates, even though, Governor, we admit your plan takes care of things for the time being. So that's one. The statement goes on to say that there are some things we're quite content about. Corporate recovery, you know, if you think about it, corporate takeover, I'm sorry. If you think about it, that was 100% of the legislature voted on a bill that I vetoed, and I said, I think I can give you a better one this year. Well, we produced a bill, thanks to Evan Davis and Wendy Cooper. Evan Davis came up with a new idea that I hadn't thought of at the time that I vetoed the bill. It made my life, frankly, a lot easier. And that idea worked so well that the Democrats and the Republicans have apparently gone through to an acceptance of it with no difficulty at all. That is a source of great satisfaction to me. I'm grateful to my staff and to Evan. I'm going to make that a law as soon as Evan gets the papers to my desk. So that we're very pleased about. It shows, as we've tried to for 3 years, that this system can work. Toxic torts, we're making good progress. You all know that because you saw the television and read the papers and know that the Senate's position has changed substantially, and I'm grateful, and so is mine. They said they dropped product liability if we dropped the exemption of municipalities. We've done that. That brings us closer. They still have some problems, but that's a situation that's resolvable, as I say in the statement. Housing. Let's face it. Can you write down on a paper what the substantive objections to housing are? I mean, have any of you heard any that haven't disappeared as arguments? And who's for housing? Most recently, the Cardinal, all the religious people, all the homeless people, all the housing constituents, all the Republicans in New York City and the environs of New York City who are most impacted by this problem. David Rockefeller calls here to lend his support. Who's against it? But who's opposed to it? And why? Whom does it damage? It doesn't involve any taxpayers' money. You have homeless people sleeping on great still, that ugly, ugly winter syndrome on the television screen every night. And everybody knows that part of the reason for that is we don't have enough housing units, and this bill would help take care of that. 60,000 units. Why wait? Why wait for the regular session? So you can trade, so you can deal, so you can diddle? Why should we have to do that? Why don't we adopt the bill now? And I say that. South Africa, we're pushing. Does it look good? No. Why? Because Ned Reagan and Senator Anderson apparently are difficult to persuade on that. But we're going to continue to push, and it'll be in my State of the State, and we'll generate all the energy we can on that issue. Municipal liability, also an area in which we've made some progress. You know that I'll be naming a commission to look pervasively at the question, and I want to repeat to you, that's an abiding concern of mine, that I think this syndrome of withdrawal from coverage and dramatic rate increases is kind of sudden, and I don't know what's going on, but I know that I don't know what's going on as completely as I'd like to, and I want somebody smarter than I to come back without spending a lot of time, maybe by March 31st, and say, hey, look, Governor, here's what happened. I have some suspicions about the way insurance companies invested money. I have some other suspicions. Call up your broker. Call up your stockbroker today. Ask them whether it's a good idea to invest in insurance companies. You know what he's going to tell you? Yes. Why? What do they know that we don't know? I mean, I thought they were all in trouble. Why should you be investing in insurance companies? Incidentally, it's always nice when things go up, but you have to ask yourself, why? Now, maybe you have the answers. If you do, get them to my commission, because they're going to have to report by March 31st or so. And finally, I say this in the statement. You know, we've had good success in this state that's made up of Republicans and Democrats, led by Warren, the Republican, and Stanley, the Democrat. We've had really excellent success in coming together on a lot of hard questions, whether it's tax cuts or balancing the budget or gap balance, rebuild New York bond issue, HERD. And we have a very, very good record of it, and it's not my record, although I will try to isolate the credit as much as possible in the months immediately ahead of us. But it's not mine, and we know that. It's Warren, it's Stanley, it's the Republicans, the Democrats. It'd be a shame at this point to change that habit of synergism and intelligent cooperation. Of course we're going to disagree, but we oughtn't to disagree more than is essential. And I think we have here a chance to put together a really good package of bills, and we're much closer than might appear. And so I today spoke to Warren again and spoke to Stanley again, asked them would they sit with me again this afternoon. They will, and their staffs are here. And Senator Anderson, of course, has recessed, as Stanley did, but what choice did they have? They didn't have any more work to do. So they've recessed but not adjourned, and that's good. And the staffs are working. And Evan will be talking with Jack Haggerty later today. They'll be talking about the medical malpractice and that agenda of items designed to reduce premiums without disadvantaging victims, if they can put that together. And I'm hopeful that we'll make some progress. That's the statement. I said it a lot shorter and a lot better in the written version.
Governor, Senator Anderson said last week that your proposals were election day gimmickry, and your deadline seems to have been set for the end of 1986. Why not shorten that deadline?
I don't know what you mean by shorten.
In other words, make the deadline July 1st instead of December 31st.
That's up to the superintendent. I mean, I didn't set the deadline of November 30th. You see, let's go back.
Not the deadline that just passed, the deadline under your new proposal.
My new proposal.
Anderson claimed you were putting everything off until after the next year's election.
If I could put it off for 5 years, I would. All I'm doing is getting as much time as the system will allow us and the arithmetic will allow us. It's not a discrete political judgment. It's not that at all. What we're doing is we're saying the best idea we have right now is claims made, and by the calculations, claims made gives us a year. That's what it comes out to. And if by calculation claims made had given us 6 months, it would only be 6 months, or if it had been 18, it would have been 18. It's not something, Mark, to put it another way, that we were able to construct. We didn't bring the sense to the numbers. The numbers spoke for themselves. And so, and this I would submit to any actuary on either side of the legislature, let them say whether we're right or wrong. Evan got an idea, or somebody got an idea about claims made. We discussed claims made, we discussed claims paid, which is essentially what Ralph Nader was talking about yesterday. Speaker Fink and Jay Adolph, you'll recall, were talking about claims paid. We tried that notion, it didn't work for a whole lot of technical reasons. Came back to claims made. When you do claims made, you give it to the people who have the sharp pencils and the computers, and they tell you. Superintendent Corcoran says this is good until 1987. But that's all there is to it. Now, I don't think Senator Anderson was really suggesting that that's a date that's constructed artificially, because if that's what he was saying, all they'd have to do is show you how. All they'd have to do is to show you, see, here's what you could do. You could make it 2 years. And if you can show me a 2-year deadline, then I'll accept that. Okay?
What are you going to do today that you didn't do yesterday? In other words, are you going to pull anything back? Are you just going to try to re-argue it, or?
I don't know if I can describe the process that simply. The best image, or the one that comes most quickly to mind is, and they don't do this anymore, but in the old days, you're old enough, in the old days, remember you had these vacuum-packed jars, I remember well from the store, and you had to open them, and you'd use a spoon or something, and you could be doing it for 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, boop, it would pop off. And then you ask yourself, which push was it? Was it that last push? Of course not. You know, I mean, it was all of them. So you keep pushing, you keep moving, you keep discussing. You get gradually closer. That's called negotiation.
Yeah, you gave him this package of bills.
Always new ideas. Every day we have new ideas. Every day. Mickey, literally, you know what you do? You take any, what do we have, 1,100 bills a year, average 3,300 bills for 3 years. Take all of our program, and we've gotten a higher percentage of our program than most governors. Whether or not you deserve credit for that is arguable. Take any one of the program bills, the major ones, Medicaid pickup, Rebuild New York bond issue. Look at their evolution from the time the council first proposes it until the time it becomes a law. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of arguments, changes, compromises. Well, a lot of them go right through. But the significant ones keep getting amended. These people work till 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they're constantly coming up with changes or variances. A comma can change anything, dropping a line. I can give you examples forever. The affirmative action provision, I don't know, what it take us 6 hours with Liz Moore fighting in the chamber there, constructing new ideas. So the way the process works is, if you did it for a week, you'd have a week's worth of new ideas. I've never seen a situation where the staffs sat down and said, I can't think of a single additional thing to do.
So what are today's new ideas?
Oh, that we do. That's what we talk about at the table. It would be a terrible offense to share that with you, and then the guys come in and say, you already told the press, why did you call us here? It's all a charade. I can't do that.
So they'd have a chance to think about them before they came to the floor.
No, Mark, after we put them together, I'll talk to you about them.
Well, Governor, you said that you had given in before on 17...
Given in? I never talk about giving in.
7 of the 17...
That makes it sound like an arm wrestling,
You
your
had
Lord.
seen the light on 7 of the 17...
I never said that. That's even worse.
17 proposals made by the Republicans. Have you seen the light on any more of their 17
I never
proposals?
said I saw the light. I saw, sometimes you see the necessity, sometimes you see the light, sometimes you see the door,
Have you seen necessities on any more of their 17 proposals?
We're always working toward consensus.
Are you, for example, maybe going to focus a little bit? You've got 6 major items, now 5. Are you going to still try to push, well, you got the corporate takeover, then the other stuff.
We won.
Okay, fine. Now, what about the other 5? You're going to push all of them, or maybe say, let's do...
Absolutely, absolutely. And, that's another question that comes up all the time. Like, what are your priorities? And, and for 3 years I've been telling you, I resist that question because it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. Today, for example, toxic tort bill might be a very popular notion. That might be the first thing they want to talk about. Why? I don't know. It was written up in an editorial somewhere. So, that it might generate a whole kind of energy for that. But then you might get a call from an association of towns tonight that says, boy, 3 towns just announced they can't get insurance. Tomorrow, municipal liability will be the big deal. And it changes. It's a constantly evolving process and evolves unpredictably. I'm not being cute. That's the way it is. It's not as pat as we'd like it to be.
Well, are you going to keep this thing up? I mean, I don't mean to be facetious. Are you just going to keep it up all month until they do something, or bring them back in January? Or is there some time or other when you finally decide, okay, we can't do it?
You decide you can't do it when you figure out that you can't do it. I mean, at one point, you say to yourself, realistically, this isn't going to work. And so you stop and you move on. We're very far from that point at the moment. And I think, you see, maybe I'm too close to this, but if you look at all these bills and you trace what's happened over the last several weeks, while all the stories are written in terms of impasse, and I can understand that because that is the gross perception, the reality is constantly coming closer together. Now, maybe the jaws will never close entirely, and that means the bill slips through and disappears. But we are moving at least in the right direction, sometimes in spurts and sporadically and eccentrically, and occasionally you lose a few steps and you go backwards, but the overall direction is forward.
Governor, what if the Senate and Assembly cannot get together during this special session? They have to wait until the next session in order to pass a malpractice bill. Worst case scenario, what would happen to the doctors, to hospitals, to people in need of health care in this state if they cannot get together during this special session?
I never like to encourage trouble, so I'm not going to be expansive in my dire predictions because I don't want to encourage dire things to occur. But obviously, the superintendent has taken the position that unless you act very quickly, we have rate increase demands as high as 76%. He has a letter, which we received last night, that said the rates could go up how much, Evan? Did he give a number?
50%.
50%. So that's what you're facing. That's what we're trying to avoid. That's the urgency. This isn't just a desirable thing we're doing. It's imperative. Of course, if we don't do it, don't you recall, let me reconstruct again, we had a date of November 30th that the superintendent gave us. I didn't make it up. I went to the superintendent and said, can you give me more time? And he said, no, I've got the applications in. I can give you more time in terms of making my decision, but responsibly, I can't give you a whole lot. That's why we just didn't kick the whole thing over to next year. You could have done that. I mean, we're so close to next year now, right? Why not just put it all into next year? But we had a November 30th date that they constructed. The only commitment I made to do anything this year that I made voluntarily was corporate takeover, where when I vetoed the bill, I said, before the end of the year, I'll give you a better bill than this one. That was a commitment I made, and I like to live up to it. It gives us a little more predictability. But I didn't make any commitments on medical malpractice. We're doing what we have to do. They told us, you know, you'd have until November 30th, and that's what I'm responding to.
Yesterday, Ralph Nader said, among other things, he after talking to you, compared Senator Anderson to Genghis Khan. But after talking to you, he compared Senator Anderson to Genghis Khan. Yeah. But
I don't like,
he said,
are you sure of that, David? I didn't see him until he just before he jumped on the plane. No, I think it's just the opposite.
You're talking
I
about...
told him I didn't like the Genghis Khan crack. So I believe he used it, he must have, because I told him, Ralph, you know, I don't think of him as Genghis Khan. I like Ralph Nader, but I don't think of Warren Anderson as Genghis Khan at all.
Governor,
but he said that this was a battle for public opinion. That seems at odds with what you described as the staff procedures, new ideas, and so on, negotiating that might eventually create the conditions for a breakthrough. He seemed to be suggesting that it wasn't staff talks and discussions and so on, but rather some coalescence of public opinion, some groundswell of public
I don't
opinion
agree.
that would
I don't
eventually
agree.
push one side or the other.
No, David, I don't agree, and I'll tell you why. If public opinion could get it done, toxic tort would have been done a long time ago. Do you know anybody in this state who agrees with the Republicans, except for some business people? Do you know anybody in the state who would say, no, these women oughtn't to be allowed to sue, these men oughtn't to be allowed to sue? I mean, do you know anybody who agrees with them? Do you know anybody in the legislature who would step forward now, or any public opinion that says we don't need the housing, or that this isn't a really good approach, the housing bill? I mean, if you could do this by poll and referenda, we'd have most of this agenda. So I don't think it's public opinion at all, and I'm not doing it that way. Now, Ralph Nader is that, you having fun with these, or is it my ears that are going? For the House to hear. All right, good. But I hear myself too well when you're up there. Would you put it down a little bit? Thank you. So no, I don't agree with him. I don't agree with Ralph on Genghis Khan. I don't agree with Ralph that it's going to be resolved by public opinion. I don't think so. I don't think the public opinion is going to make the difference, or as I say, we would already have most of these bills.
He also talked about the insurance department. Do you place any blame on the insurance department in years past for not having recognized insurance company rates as being too low, artificially so?
I'll tell you something I've said from this podium before and said to Nader yesterday. As a matter of fact, I asked Ralph, who's made a study nationally, about what he thinks the reason for the sudden syndrome is. Is it manipulation like the old oil company cartels, or what is it? And he didn't know exactly, but he said that he had heard me describe kind of casually what I thought it might be, and he says, I think you're very close to the truth. Now, this is what I'm asking the commission to tell me. But my suggestion was what might have happened here is that insurance companies, or part of the explanation might be that insurance companies, eager to take advantage of a really lucrative interest rate for investments, depressed their premium rates in a desire to get in as much investment cash as possible, then laid it off at 10, 11, 12%. In the process, you know, getting more risky, maybe even imprudent about how low they set the rates. Now, because regulators almost always are eager to protect the consumer against high rates, it might be that the regulators, you know, either tolerated this or had no choice because you have a competitive fee system, like in this state. So that's what now, is there any fault by the regulators? I want to hear from my commission. As of March 31, come back to me, and maybe they'll tell me some reasons to believe that you can, improve regulation, but I'm not aware of any. I certainly have no criticism of Corcoran, who I think has done very, very well.
Do you think you made a mistake in calling the legislature back this week, that possibly if you had this week to negotiate further and had come back next week, that the results might have been different?
If I didn't call them back, we wouldn't have negotiated this week.
Well, the negotiations were going on last week.
Nothing was happening. That's why I called them back. You know, if we were making progress, you know, then we would have been fine.
Well, doesn't the effect, Governor, of the session cause each side to dig in their heels? I mean, you say the process is coming together.
Dave, I would have preferred to do it without a special session, without calling them back. I would have preferred to work it out a long time ago. Let's be candid. We couldn't get the Republicans even to talk to us until November 20th. Evan Davis was negotiating for a long, long time. This is correct, is it not, Evan? They didn't come forward until November 20th. And despite the fact that they hadn't come forward until November 20th, we were able to do a part of their agenda, 7 1/3 pieces, Evan describes it as, of their 17. No, I'm not eager to use extraordinary powers like special session powers. And I've said this to the legislative leaders, that those things should be reserved only when you have no alternative. And I felt that I had no alternative here. Now, that's not true of housing toxic torts, et cetera. I mean, those things are desirable and are late, but one could argue that, you know, you could wait as you wait on all other desirable things. The one thing that created the imperative urgency was medical malpractice and the November 30th date, where I felt I could not responsibly say we can ignore the date. Now, once I knew they were coming here, I said what I said in July, that if when they get here, we can dispose of some other things at the same time. You recall, all summer long I said the same thing. I remember Mickey interviewing me a couple of times, and I said, look, medical malpractice is the big bill. If I can get the others done when we're there, why not? I mean, the sooner we start with housing, the more we get out of next year's agenda. You know, next year's a political year, they tell me. Next year's an election year. Somebody put a circle on my calendar and said, you know, it's going to be different from what is different about this year? A lot of things. People are going to be running for office. I don't know how that works. Sometimes I think it's an advantage. But you know, why not do it now? There'll be plenty of issues to keep people busy next year.
By having these other items on the agenda, couldn't that take away time from the big issue?
No, it doesn't work that way. We can walk and chew gum at the same time up here.
What's wrong with Ralph Nader's pay as the costs are
Fred,
incurred,
I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to try, but I'd be pleased to turn you over to Evan, who can go on ad nauseum as to the technical way it works. I mean, I was there with the speaker, and we had long discussions about it, and I concluded after listening to the experts why it doesn't work. It has a lot to do with reserves and having to do it without reserves. And this, technically, I believe it doesn't work, but I'm not competent to give you the best possible description. They will, I'm sure.
I asked this before, just to get...
And you know, so no conceptual problem. Stanley made the case. Conceptually, it was fine for me. I don't have any visceral response to it. It's all a technical question. Does it work? You know, does it provide you with sufficient coverage cheap enough? That's, and for a whole lot of technical reasons, I was persuaded, and Stanley was, I think, I'm not sure, that it just didn't work. But they'll talk about it.
Just as a practical matter, is there any deadline on this when you finally decide nuts, we'll do it in a regular, which is about 3 weeks away anyway?
No, but not really. Not really, Mickey. You know how it works up here. The first thing is the budget. I mean, it's not 3. You see, to say, you can do the housing agenda. First of all, we've had it for years. And this idea we've had for many, many months. And, well, you know, another suggestion that strikes me is, disconcerts me a bit. Let's get it in with all those other pieces next year. Why? Why are you so eager to get it into next year? It doesn't take you any time to address this issue. Just step forward, Mr. Legislator or Madam Legislator. Tell me what you don't like about the housing provision. They don't even have an answer. So they must be ready to make a decision. Why are you so eager to get it over to next year? Do you want to trade with me? And if you want to trade, let's trade now. What do you want? I have people who are going to die this winter, homeless people. That's not dramatic. You're all writing about it, and you should be writing about it. It is a travesty that we don't have the units. Now you have 60,000 units. It doesn't cost you a penny. The city whose money it is says, please give it to us. The Cardinal pleads with you. The Republicans plead with you. It's like the people in the wheelchairs, the ORS. They won't even give you an explanation for why they won't pass it. We had 3,000 people come up here, and the Republicans told them it's not worthy of consideration. You know, enough already. At least give us a good reason why you won't do it. Is the cause not worthy? No, the cause is very worthy. Is it expensive? No, it doesn't cost us anything. Well, then what are you telling me? You want some political advantage? Find your political advantage in something else. We'll have 1,500 bills that you can find political advantage in.
Governor, if they did the battery park closing piece right now,
Just like that, they could do it.
could it really get homeless people off the streets this winter?
Oh, no, of course not. But if they don't do it now, it's less likely you'll ever get them off the streets, because once you get it into the political agenda and you start trading, it's less likely we'll get the darn thing.
What do you think's the point here, Governor? This institutional showdown where the Senate has decided that it can read you the riot act and tell you what the programs are going to be every year?
Here's where we're going to have a disagreement. I think you people, because your job requires it, find analyses, even where there are none. You find plans, even where there are none. Hugh Carey, I teased you about it the other day. Everybody ascribed to Carey all kinds of exotic predispositions, plans, schemes, scenarios, and I don't think it was like that. Why did he fire Najari the day he fired him? I'll never forget the spate of stories, analyses in the Times. He had planned it from, it wasn't like that at all. Huey was out on the island. He ran into a situation that was very tragic, that reminded him of tragic events. He walked into the office, he says, Najari goes, and that was it. And we all said, what? And all these analyses pieces appeared. You know, this is what really happened. I don't believe there's any scenario being constructed by Warren and the Republicans. Let me tell you some things I've read that I just don't believe. I won't argue with them strenuously because they're matters of opinion. Washington called up Warren and said, get Cuomo. That's my favorite because that's the best one for me. Can you imagine? You know, Washington's concerned about Cuomo. They couldn't care less. They can't spell my name. They couldn't care less. Pat Buchanan, they wouldn't take his call up here, Pat Buchanan, so he's no problem. I mean, I don't see that scenario at all. The Republicans are concerned you're going to come in their districts. That's Stanley last night talked to the press. You know, he did a little thing about Svengali. He told me about it today. And, well, if that were true, you know, and if that were my style and that were my intent, well, how would giving me toxic torts, housing, and all these issues help? If you were concerned about my going into Roy Goodman's district, unless he uses his millions to run for governor, why would you give us the housing issue? So that doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's something simpler. I think on medical malpractice, there is a conceptual disagreement. I think on medical malpractice, they are prepared, the Republicans, to take care of their interests by saying to victims of malpractice, you're going to have to take less than you deserve. We'll make that judgment. We think that's good for society. I don't feel that way. The Democrats happen to agree with me. Stanley Fink certainly. Not prepared to make that judgment, okay? A conceptual difference of opinion. And Fred, where there is no conceptual difference of opinion, like the corporate takeover, there's agreement. What happened to the political scheme there? Why did they give me this wonderful bill? That's all mine. I wrote the veto message by hand. I made the commitment to produce it. Now I produce it. Now I can go to the business council and say, Governor produced a bill. Why would they give me that? With if, you know.
You vetoed the last one, so they figured they might as well go with this one.
But what did they get? They got tiputa. They didn't get anything. I got a bill. I'll go around all next year and say, hey, you business people say I'm a mushy-headed liberal progressive. Look at this. I don't see it. I think we're just disagreeing. I have not handled it perhaps as well as I should have. You know, maybe I should have spoken more clearly and earlier. That might be an explanation. I don't know. Maybe I haven't had enough meetings. Whatever. I think you could write an analysis that says, Governor, you should have done it differently, or Warren, you should have done it differently. But I don't see the schemes and the plans. I really don't. If I saw it, I'd be talking to you about it.
If
Jay,
the Senate continues
I'll get
to,
back.
if the Senate continues to block your proposals on toxic torts and housing and medical malpractice, do you intend next year to go into the Republican districts and campaign personally against them, using those issues against them?
I will not do anything differently this year than I have done in all other years, nor will I do it with any different design. I went up. Nancy Lorraine Hoffman said, please come up. Quattrochocchi came up and said to me, please come to my district. I went to Quattrochocchi's district, didn't even know who he was running against, and made a speech for Quattrochocchi. I knew who Nancy was running against, and I went up at their request. I also went to George Harvey, or I forget his first name, Harvey, who ran and lost by the largest amount ever recorded against the Democratic candidate. So you do, one goes, and you do what you have to do. And how do you campaign? Do you target, say, I'm going to get this person? Of course not. You go out and you talk about the issues. You go out and you say, hey, look, I wanted a housing bill. This person said we don't need housing. Of course you do that. How could you avoid it? Especially if you happen to be campaigning yourself. How do you avoid it? But this notion that we're sitting around with a blackboard, you know, or a corkboard saying, get her. Do they have any hers? No. Oh, no, just Westchester. No, she's all right. Get him. We don't do that. And it wouldn't make any difference. Can I tell you what's really important? Wouldn't make any difference. I was talking to Andrew earlier today, and he was, for some reason, reminding me of the campaign in 1982. And one of the events I'll never forget was the night Huey decided to endorse Koch. Now, somehow I'd gotten a phone call. I had one of the best, it's not all in the diary, I confess to you, but it was a terrific conversation. I called Huey, and we had this wonderful conversation. I said, Huey, you doing this thing? Why are you doing this thing? I mean, you said the following, you gave me all the reasons, here's all the logic. He says, it's not like that. I said, what is it? He says, well, you know this business, Mario. He says, listen, think of it this way. This is going to be the best thing that happened to you. I said, Huey, I think you're right. And it was. I mean, and we were laughing about it. He said, tell the truth, Mario. You think this is going to hurt you? I said, no, but I think it's going to hurt you. He said, what's the difference? I deserve it. That's what he said. That is the truth. That is the truth. And the next day we went to a press conference, and they had this big story. You know, Cuomo in the Post wrote something like, his own governor said he's a schlemiel, wouldn't go with him, he's no good, went with Koch. You know, and everybody's writing these things. And I think Carol was there, and he asked me about it. I think you asked me about it. Somebody from the Times asked me, I think. And I said, well, I told Huey to lay off the PCBs. And I'll tell you, it was one of my best days. He didn't. It doesn't hurt. People don't do it that way. You can bring in Ronald Reagan, who, in my opinion, is the most popular president in the history of the United States. Well, let's say modern times. Roosevelt certainly wasn't this popular. John Kennedy never was as president. Nobody ever was. Eisenhower, maybe, but there wasn't the power of the commitment to Reagan. Now, he can't get you elected, and he proved it. Why didn't they win the Senate? Why didn't they win more in the Senate? Why didn't they win the House? Why can't he, when he shows up, change people's minds? Because they're more intelligent than that. They might like you or dislike you. They know there's a certain lack of intelligence to saying whatever you say about this candidate can be determinative. Most of the time, they suspect you're only there because of your party affiliation anyway. So Bess Meyerson runs against Liz Holtzman, has all the money, Dave Garth, Moynihan, Carey, Koch. There was nobody else left to endorse. Blown out of the water. Doesn't work. It was money. Tom Kean didn't win for his legislators by winning at the top of the ticket. He gave them money. And they went on television, etc. That's,
You got any extra money?
Are you kidding? Do you know what terrible shape I'm in? Mark, listen, I'm glad you brought this up, because we have to work on the next fundraiser. Mark, Lerman, I hope people will listen to me and remember, Lerman spent 15 million, 14 million. I only have 9. The Republicans in your newspaper reported they were going to spend $20 or $25 million in this campaign.
Lerman has to spend that money to get known. You don't have to get known.
I have to undo part of the recognition. See, it works both ways.
On medical malpractice, Senator Anderson said yesterday that...
I'm sorry,
Senator Anderson said yesterday that tort reform is completely off the table. Are you...
Court reform?
Tort reform, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry,
And
it's my
court
fault.
reform,
Yeah.
but tort reform is completely off the table. Are you willing to consider even any modest concessions during your meeting with Senator Anderson this afternoon?
I think we're having some difficulty with the language. You see, and if you really, if we had time and we want to have a little fun and we made everybody write down what you think is tort reform and then collected all the pieces the way you did in the classroom, you'd really have a ball here. So let's use some other language, because I don't know what you mean by tort reform. Sometimes I don't know what, Stanley uses the expression one way, Warren uses it another. I say this: I am opposed to any further provisions that would deal with this problem by asking the victim to give up part of what a jury or the court system would say is just compensation. Okay? So anything that would have the effect of taking it out of the victim, I'm opposed to. I think we've done enough of that already. All right? The disincentive effect of dealing with attorney's fees, etc. So I'm opposed to that. Now, as I said in the statement, anything that will affect rates without victimizing the victim. Well, how? Well, I'll give you possibilities that have been talked about. People talk about judicial panels. People talk about review mechanisms. People talk about the privilege. People talk about the tax impact. These are things that can mathematically get ascribed to them a certain impact on the rates, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. They do not, in my opinion, and I don't think in Stanley's opinion, victimize victims. That's the kind of thing I would look at.
Politically, though, Senator Anderson has committed himself to the broad tort reform. How are the Republicans going to get together with you without seeming politically to be capitulating to you?
Oh, politics is not my strength, but I don't think it's that much of a problem. It's never that much of a problem. When do you ever get everything? Do you mean that you can never agree? You see, John, what you're really saying is, politically, you can't ever agree unless you get everything, because you're perceived as surrendering. Every compromise is a little bit of surrender from both sides. Of course it is. And of course you will write, this one won, this one lost. That's part of the game. But you don't get anything done unless you give a little, almost always. There are no absolute victories, or very few, in a situation where the Republicans control one house and the Democrats another. Now, on tort reform, if he really believes that a $250,000 cap, which I remind you, a cap is this. A cap says a jury would give you much more than we think this system can afford. A jury would say it is just and right that you should receive X dollars to compensate you. A jury, the heart of our system, the court says this is what's just. And without arguing with that, you say we can't afford justice. We're going to set a limit on justice. $250,000. You know what another way to say that is? We will abide in justice because we're not capable of thinking of a better way. Now, that's a cap. He takes that position and he goes further and says, California says if you did it, because obviously if it's that severe a step, and we have to agree it is severe. Nobody is saying, no Republican is coming forward and saying, no, it doesn't mean anything, doesn't affect these poor victims. Nobody's saying that. They're saying, of course it does. Well, if you're saying that, then shouldn't you be able to demonstrate how much of a difference it will make? Now, I ask you, when they make the case to you, what do they tell you? They say it'll make 20% difference. Has anybody here read the report they're relying on? Anybody here who would hold it up and say, of course it's 20%, that's clear, read the report, everybody knows it's 20%. Our superintendent says it's 5%. Who's right? Anybody here competent to know? Anybody here call the superintendent a liar? Why should he lie? And who is this California group that put together the 20%? Okay? Now, what I would say if I were on their side of it, and I can't find myself comfortably in that position, Governor's dead wrong. We passed this bill because we wanted to avoid a crisis. He's a dummy. Man can't count. Man sold out to the tort lawyers, doesn't care about anything. No leadership favored. No leadership. Why, leadership, he would have done the cap. Would have beaten up the victims. You can say that everywhere. You can go to your doctors. You could probably win all the polls with the doctors. I want to tell you that I did this to keep your premiums down. But I have a bill. If the governor had passed it, we would have reduced your premiums 20%. Terrific. He wins every way. He gets the bill up here. I say thank you to him. Bring him right here. Say thank you. The doctors say you did a great job, Warren. It's that stiff governor who didn't do the right thing. How can you lose? You have the best of all worlds.
Does it beat up victims, Governor, to insist that they accept awards that, for lost wages that have the equivalent of what they would have paid in taxes taken out, to insist that they accept awards for medical expenses that amount only to their actual medical expenses and not to some jury's projection of what those expenses might be?
Take them one at a time, okay? Let's start with what? Actual medical damages? Who would say what medical damages are allowed?
Well, there's a practical problem
Oh,
that you have pointed out, but does it diminish the justice to the
Of course it
victims?
does. Of course it does. If what you're saying is this brain-damaged child, before this brain-damaged child can get speech therapy, the parents have to go before some group and say, this is how we justify this as a medical expense. And then you have lawyers from the bureaucracy saying, that's not what medical means, that's therapeutic and not medical. That, of course that's a trauma that you have to go all through. Of course that's difficult. Now, if you asked, well, you know, would you, well, your question was, does it disadvantage the victim? Of course it does. Of course it does. What do you get back for it? Now, what was the other question?
Actual expenses versus some jury's projection of what the expenses might be.
No, taxes, I think. Taxes.
Taxes.
We've had discussions, Evan and I, on this, and Jerry, on taxes going round. I came up with some cute ideas on it. There are a lot of problems with taxes. You don't talk to the jury about taxes. What is a jury instructed on taxes now? Nothing?
Right now, they get no instruction.
Nothing at all. So what would the rule be? The jury should be told what? So, I mean, you get practical about it. What should we tell the jury? That this is tax-free? And what does that mean? So how should they discount that? I mean, what is it worth? It changes with each individual, right? Changes with your condition, changes with your situation, changes with your shelters. I mean, what? So where do you get a number? How do you convert it into something real? So what I'm saying, David, is that, you know, these are things you can continue to look at and study and learn because they're complicated. But one can plausibly argue that there is a disproportionate damage to the victim. And I say disproportionate in terms of what you achieve for the system and distributive justice. It's disproportionate. That's the argument that's made by Stanley. Let me not mislead you. A lot of these things are not black and white, are not, you know, absolutes. A lot of them you can argue about forever, and depending on your Jesuitical tendencies, even beyond forever. I guess you got your answer.
Curtis Sliwa, I guess, blocked the gates.
Curtis Sliwa, I had a great talk with him yesterday.
Tell us about Curtis Sliwa.
I'll tell you about Curtis. No, I won't. Curtis, as I said to him yesterday, we're all friends, believe it or not, Curtis and Lisa. When Curtis Sliwa was totally unknown, when he was the Magnificent 13, when there were 13 of them, beautiful kids, they came up here to get support from politicians. I guess it was 78, 79? 79, sure, I was lieutenant governor. Nobody would talk to them because they had funny hats and they looked like tough guys, you know, and they were from the ghettos. Curtis would tell you, I'm from the ghetto. That's why he announced it. Terrific, me too. Now, I was lieutenant governor, which meant I was available to anybody who came through the door. Sit down, have a cup of coffee. We wouldn't even let them out, you know. So Curtis came to see me. I tell you, those days were better in a lot of ways. Curtis came to see me, and we talked. I was very, very impressed with him. I gave speeches about them. I went out, had a fundraiser for them. It was the first time I was ever in a disco. I'm not sure I'll ever do it again, but we had a fundraiser with Herman Badillo and Carol Bellamy for them, and they became the guardian angels. And I met with them, and I know them, and I still am a strong supporter of the idea of the guardian angels. Curtis personally, I think, on occasions has been intemperate and kind of captivated by the television light, etc., but overall, what they represent in this society is very important and to be encouraged. I have defended them many times with mayors of other cities. I took their part in New York City when the police and others disagreed with them, and I still feel strongly toward them, and affirmatively. That is not to say that I agree with everything they do or every position. On the fair, I had a great talk with him yesterday. I said, Curtis, quote me, say he'd love that. So he's waiting for me now at the mansion. He'll never forgive me for going out the back door today, which I did. See? And I thought about it. I could have gone. I spoke to him on the phone. He says, we're going to stay for the picture, he said. And I said, well, that's not a bad idea. So he's still there waiting for the picture. He probably resents me, you know. But I said to him yesterday, Curtis, you're up here by my house. Why don't you go by Gracie Mansion? Why don't you go by the mayor? You know, he's got the big surplus. Why are you asking me? He says, well, you know how I feel about the mayor. Oh, you don't like him? No, I don't like him. He says, I like you. That's why I did your house. I think the truth is they wouldn't take his picture in the city, to be honest with you. I don't think he'd get his picture taken. Up here, he'll get his picture taken. Now, how do I feel about that? It's terrific. He's bright, he's aggressive, he believes deeply, and he's doing what he can to get his message out. Do you resent him? No, not at all. Because I don't want to take my picture with him. Sliwa is being arrested now by Albany PD. Congratulations, Curtis. Okay.